What's up everyone, my name is Oskar Woźniak and today, together with my classmates, I am going to present basic information about human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a so-called milestone document in the history of human rights. Many of basic ideas that animated the human rights movement in general developed in the aftermath of the Second World War and the events of the Holocaust, culminating in the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Paris by these guys, the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, which was drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. But basically, in general, what are human rights? These are moral principles or norms for certain standards of human behavior, which are regularly protected in municipal and international law. They are commonly understood as fundamental rights, and here I quote, to which a person is inherently entitled simply because she or he is a human being, and which are inherited, and here again I quote, inherited in all human beings, regardless of age, ethnic origin, location, language, religion, ethnicity, or any other status, basically any human being. They are supposed to be, of course, applicable everywhere and at every time in the sense of being universal. And here is like a problem, because some thinkers suggest that human rights should be a minimum requirement, and it's like in the Western countries, not only Western but developed ones. In the developed countries, it's like a minimum requirement to avoid the worst case abuses. While in some countries, unfortunately, these are still seen as a high standard. Still, there are some countries in which people do not obey basic human rights. But hopefully it will change soon, and everyone in the world, people will be able to live on that minimum requirement standard. For the end, just a fun fact, the world first document containing a commitment by, in that country, I think it was a king, doesn't matter, authority to his people to respect certain legal rights was Magna Carta, or so-called Great Charter, and in here you will get a picture of it. So that was like an introduction, basic information for a start about human rights. I hope you liked it, and I hope you will like the next parts. See you.
So, what types of human rights are there? Human rights can be divided into different categories, one of those being civil and individual rights, which encompass the security and liberty of an individual. These might include the privacy, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, as well as freedom from slavery and torture. Another category is the rule of law, which guarantees equal recognition and protection within the law, which for example means the prohibition of arbitrary arrest, as well as an impartial hearing and trial. The third category is rights of political expression, which encompass voting rights, as well as freedom of expression and the right to assembly, as well as the right to take part in government. The fourth category is economic and social rights, which include an adequate standard of living, free choice of employment, the right to join and form trade unions, as well as any type of social security. And finally, the last category is the rights of communities, which encompass the self-determination and protection of minority cultures. However, a distinction can be made between positive and negative rights. Positive rights being those which refer to rights that the state must provide, such as food, healthcare, or education, while negative rights refer to the freedom from certain things, such as slavery, suppression, or torture.
International law, also known as public international law or law of nations, is a system of treaties and agreements between nations that governs how nations interact with other nations, citizens of other nations, and businesses of other nations. It is important to note that it primarily, but not exclusively, is applicable to nations rather than individuals themselves. International law falls into two different categories: private international law and public international law. Private international law deals with controversies which arise between private entities, such as organizations which have a significant connection to more than one nation. An example of a lawsuit was a toxic leak in Bhopal, India, caused by Union Carbide, a US corporation. Public international law concerns relationships between nations. They take care of matters such as international behavior, the laws of the sea, economic law, diplomatic law, environmental law, human rights law, and humanitarian law. Some principles of the public law are written down in treaties. However, there are also some which aren't written down anywhere, called the customary law. There are a few international organizations which enforce the international law, the most notable one being the United Nations. Just cogence, also known as peremptory norm, is the fundamental principle of the international law that is accepted by the international community of states as a norm from which no derogation is permitted. There is no universal agreement regarding precisely which norms are just cogence, nor how a norm reaches that status, but it is generally accepted that just cogence bans genocide, maritime piracy, which is the plundering or hijacking of a ship on international waters, enslaving in general, wars of aggression, territorial aggrandizement, torture, and refoulement. The latter forbids a country receiving asylum seekers from returning them to a country in which they would be in likely danger of persecution.
I'm presenting you UNICEF. UNICEF is known as the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. It was created by the United Nations General Assembly on 11th of December 1946. It was created to provide emergency food and healthcare to children and mothers in countries that had been devastated by World War II. You may ask, why do we talk about this organization today? Most basic human survival needs include food and water, sufficient rest, clothing, and shelter. These needs are human rights as well, and UNICEF is there to provide it. It works in 190 countries through country programs and UNICEF national committees. UNICEF was able to save nearly 50 million lives since year 2000. Thanks to UNICEF, only in 2020, 92 million children and women received healthcare services. 106 million people were provided with wash supplies, and nearly 301 million children supported with education.
Another example of a human rights defending organization is the Anti-Slavery International. Now you might say that slavery is not such a renowned issue, why is there still an organization? Well, let me tell you, there's still approximately 40 million people suffering from slavery to this day. That includes forced labor, human trafficking, death bondage, and many more things. And let me tell you, this is only one of many organizations who are trying to tackle this issue. But how do you really tackle such a huge issue? Well, the Anti-Slavery International has collaborated with many companies, NGOs, and governments in order to raise awareness and tackle the issue of modern day slavery. Some of the things they have done is, for example, build schools in places like Niger or Mauritania, where we know there's a lot of issues surrounding lack of education, and they did so by getting money from their sponsors and donations. Another thing they have done is provide microloans, which are basically loans on a smaller scale to women who are trying to gain freedom, who have previously either suffered some sort of abuse or exploitation, and now they're trying to give them these microloans which might help them to build a career. This organization has been heavily involved in the implementation of anti-slavery laws from all around the world. One of the bigger projects they have been involved in is basically the human trafficking from Vietnam to the UK. Basically, there's a huge problem with children being taken from Vietnam to the UK in order to exploit them for many things, including cannabis production or prostitution. However, in 2013, the anti-slavery organization shed a light on this illegal activity, and since then there have been many campaigns all around Vietnam and the UK. In Vietnam, these campaigns offered people an alternative job in order to prevent them from migrating to someone else, whereas in the UK, many organizations started taking care of children or adults who are a part of human trafficking and suffering from that trauma. Another project they have been involved in is the issues surrounding workers who migrate from Nepal to Lebanon, being exploited via long working hours and horrible living conditions. As of right now, there are over 200,000 women living in Lebanon who have migrated from Nepal for job opportunities. What the anti-slavery organization has done is collaborate with the CAFA, who do many things supporting women who are abused and exploited in Lebanon. Even in Nepal, they have started raising awareness about migration and started teaching potential migrants how to deal with risks and how to claim their rights. Moreover, they have been involved in talks with the government of Nepal and Lebanon to change rules related to migration and the exploitation of workers. Even last year during the pandemic, where we know a lot of people have suffered, they have done things like provide 1,500 children full-time education in Niger, or provide health and hygiene kits in Senegal, and even have provided food supplies in Nepal. The reason why I picked this organization is because it is diverse with its actions. It's not strictly bound to anti-slavery, but it's also involved in many other aspects of people suffering. And they have been operating for over 180 years, which basically makes them the world's oldest human rights organization. But if you want to get to know more and maybe even help, check out their website. It's going to be on the screen, and yeah.
Amnesty International is an international non-governmental organization with its headquarters in the United Kingdom, focused on human rights. The organization says it has more than 7 million members and supporters around the world. The stated mission of the organization is to campaign for a world in which every person enjoys all of the human rights described in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international human rights instruments. Amnesty International was founded in London in 1961 following the publication of the article The Forgotten Prisoners in The Observer on 28 May 1961 by the lawyer Peter Benenson. Amnesty draws attention to human rights abuses and its campaigns for compliance with international laws and standards. It works to mobilize public opinion to generate pressure on governments where abuse takes place. Amnesty considers capital punishment to be the ultimate, irreversible denial of human rights. The organization was awarded the 1977 Nobel Peace Prize for its defense of human dignity against torture and the United Nations Prize in the field of human rights in 1978.
The International Federation for Human Rights is a French non-governmental human rights organization founded in 1922. The second oldest international human rights organization. The organization is made up of over 184 member organizations in over 100 countries. Its headquarters are located in Paris, and its current president is Alice Mouguet. It's independent from any government and is funded mostly by donations. Its total yearly income estimates over 3 million euros. Its purpose is to promote respect for all the rights set out by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Amongst its other priorities are the protection of human rights defenders, protection of women's rights, protection of migrant rights, protection of democratic principles, and promotion of effective and fair judicial systems. The organization achieves its goals through the use of various methods, including but not limited to monitoring and promoting human rights, assisting the victims, providing support and training to other human rights organizations, opening dialogues with the government, and generally raising awareness.